Welcome to today's explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here because we are going to completely change the way you look at a simple trip to the beach. You know, when you lay down your towel, you probably think you're resting on this nice, static, peaceful piece of land. But actually, you're not. You are sitting right on the front lines of a dynamic world of geological warfare, bizarre biological surprises, and massive, invisible forces moving the earth right beneath your feet. So let's just dive right into it. Let's kick things off with this majestic quote from the legendary environmentalist Rachel Carson. She wrote, "In every curving beach, in every grain of sand, there is a story of the earth." And honestly, she hit the nail on the head. A beach isn't just a physical place, it's a profound, ongoing story. But as we're about to see, the story of how that sand gets there and where it eventually goes, well, it's a lot grittier, far more active, and maybe a little grosser than you might expect. Part 1. The Secret Life of Sand. What are you actually sitting on? Let's break down the origins of that comfy bed of sand you're lounging on. There are three main sources here. First up, decomposed rocks, specifically hard minerals like quartz and feldspar. Now, these guys start their journey thousands of miles inland, literally tumbling down rivers and breaking down over millions of years. Second, we have organic byproducts. If you've ever marveled at those beautiful pink beaches in Bermuda, well, you're actually looking at the decaying shells of tiny single-celled organisms called foraminifera. And third, well, if you've ever enjoyed the pristine, famous white sand beaches of Hawaii, you're lounging on digested and excreted calcium carbonate reef material. Yep, you guessed it, you are essentially nesting on parrotfish poop. No way, right? But yes, a single giant bumphead parrotfish can produce up to 100 pounds of white sand every single year. It's wild. They use these heavy, beak-like mouths to scrape algae right off of dead corals. They grind up all that inedible calcium carbonate in their guts, and they literally excrete beautiful white sand. So think about this. These fish aren't just maintaining the health of the coral reef ecosystem. They are quite literally the primary manufacturers of some of the most sought-after tourist destinations on the entire planet. Moving on to Section 2, the coastal conveyor belt, or why beaches are basically rivers of sand. See, once that sand finally arrives at the coast, it doesn't just stay put, not at all. It gets caught up in a process called longshore drift. Basically, it's a geological phenomenon where sediment is transported along a coast entirely parallel to the shoreline. And this is completely driven by oblique incoming winds and waves, creating a current right there in the surf zone. So instead of picturing the beach as some stationary parking lot for sand, I want you to imagine it as a massive invisible conveyor belt, continuously moving sediment right under our feet. Here's exactly how that invisible conveyor belt works at the micro level. Think of it as a three-step dance called the sawtooth movement. First up is the swash. That's when the breaking surf pushes water and sand up the beach at a diagonal angle. Next comes the backwash, where gravity takes over and pulls that water straight back down the slope, perpendicular to the shoreline. And finally, the transport. Because the sand goes up diagonally and comes down straight, a single grain of sand ends up zigzagging down the beach in this sawtooth pattern. Through just this simple, daily rhythm, an entire beach can physically move tens of meters a day. Tens of meters! Section 3. Winter storms versus summer shores. The seasonal battle of the beach. Let's look at a fascinating real-world example of this movement in action. Up in Acadia National Park in Maine, there's this unique spot called Sand Beach. It's a south-facing cove totally trapped between these steep granite peninsulas. Now, what makes it incredibly rare, especially for being so far north, is that 70% of its sand is made of crushed marine life. We're talking mussels, urchins, barnacles. It's a carbonate beach that gets constantly resupplied by the ocean. But this beach holds a pretty dramatic seasonal secret. This unique environment sets the stage for an unbelievable story of seasonal violence and restoration. In the wintertime, massive nor'easter storms literally scour Acadia's sand beach. During really harsh storms, up to 8 vertical feet of sand can be dragged completely out into the cove. 8 feet. It flattens the dunes, exposes these massive underlying boulders, and has even uncovered the remnants of an old 20th century shipwreck. But the sand doesn't go far. When summer finally rolls around, the gentle southern winds and waves act as a restorative force. They push all that pinkish gold sand right back onto the shore, completely covering the shipwreck and rebuilding the dunes perfectly in time for tourist season. Which brings us to Section 4, the flaws of hard engineering, and our struggle to control a moving landscape. Look, as humans, we generally like our real estate to stay exactly where we put it, right? But to understand why our interventions almost always fail, we have to talk about the sediment budget. Think of a coastal system exactly like your bank account. You have sources of sand acting as deposits, and sinks, like deep offshore waters, acting as withdrawals. And longshore drift? Well, that's the currency actively flowing between them. It's this delicate, incredibly precise natural supply chain. So the moment we try to freeze a beach in place, we completely bankrupt this budget.
This creates a sort of showdown between two main ways we try to manage our coasts. On the left side of the ring, we have hard engineering, your concrete seawalls, detached breakwaters, and wooden groins. Sure, they're designed to trap sand, and they do successfully trap it on the updrift side, but here's the catch. They completely starve the downdrift side of the conveyor belt, which actually accelerates erosion further down the coast. It's a mess. On the right side, we have soft engineering, things like managed retreat or beach nourishment. This approach preserves the beach using natural materials, but the huge downside here is that it requires us to constantly, artificially dump new sand just to keep up with the drift.
And the consequences of that hard engineering can be absolutely devastating. Take the Timaru port down in New Zealand as a prime cautionary tale. Back in the late 19th century, they built this massive port that completely blocked the natural longshore drift heading north. Now, the sediment piled up beautifully on the South Beach, looks great there, but it actively starved the coastline to the north. Fast forward to the 1930s, and the barrier enclosing the nearby Waimataita Lagoon had completely eroded away, destroying the entire lagoon ecosystem. We literally bankrupt one ecosystem sediment budget just to build a port. Section 5. Building with Nature. The Future of Coastal Management. Okay, so if giant concrete walls cause all this downstream destruction, what exactly are we supposed to do? Well, we've tried soft engineering through beach nourishment, which is essentially just shipping in sand to replace what gets lost. But traditional nourishment means dumping 1 to 2 million cubic meters of sand onto a shore every 3 to 5 years. It is outrageously expensive, and honestly, that constant repetitive dumping severely stresses and disturbs the local seabed ecosystem way before it ever gets a chance to recover. But there's actually a brilliant, super innovative solution pioneered by the Dutch, known as the sand engine. Let's look at the timeline of how this played out. In 2011, instead of fighting nature, they decided to lean into it. They dumped a colossal 21.5 million cubic meters of sand in one massive go, creating this giant 128-hectare hook-shaped peninsula. And the genius of it? They just stopped. They walked away. They let the natural wind, waves, and longshore drift do all the heavy lifting of distributing the sand over decades. By 2016, scientists realized it was working even better than their initial 20-year estimate. It was such a hit that in 2019, the UK copied the exact model for their Bacton gas terminal. And by 2031, this single Dutch project is projected to naturally gain 200 hectares of brand new beach, completely without human intervention. So why is this building with nature approach such an absolute game changer? Well, by depositing a massive volume of sand all at once, we drastically reduce that ecological disturbance from every 3 years down to maybe once every 20 years. We let natural forces do the actual distribution. And incredibly, because the area is just left alone for decades, it stimulates the emergence of entirely new plant and animal ecosystems right there on the newly formed dunes. Ultimately, it's a highly cost-effective, long-term coastal defense strategy that finally works with the coastal conveyor belt rather than fighting against it. Which brings us to the end of today's explainer. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a provocative thought to ponder the next time you visit the ocean. You now know that sand is literally born from crushed mountains and parrotfish, right? And you know that it's in this state of constant zigzagging motion all along the coast. It is a shared global resource on an endless journey. So, if a beach is always moving, who really owns the sand beneath your towel? Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep asking questions, keep looking closely at the world around you, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.